Besides the feeling of love, were you able to kind of step outside of the experience and say, what is going on? Or were you so immersed in the experience that you didn't have that perspective?
I was the experience. While the experience was going on, I was the experience, clearly, right? While this was going on, this light was everywhere, scintillating. A thought forms in my mind. And the thought is, wow, this is the stuff of which everything is made. And by that, those were mental words. But before the mental words, there was a thought. And for the first time, there was a thought that was before it became words. This I realized later. But when I was doing it, it was like I was stunned because it was a thought and then there were words.
Hmm.
Where normally before I was always thinking in words. So they were never thoughts that were without words. In fact, it was only with a lot of work that I did later that I could separate the thought before it's verbalized, is reified in our mind. It is, which is how it must be in consciousness before it is transformed into words, mental words, and then the thought that we normally think is the thought, which is already mental. It took me years to actually, meditation and so on, and then realizing what I was doing. So I'm now moving back many years forward, but back at this point, I realized that there was a distinction. There was a distinction between this flash of insight and then the words. I say, this is what everything is made of. Also, at that time, the feeling with that energy was not only love, but also peace and joy. They were mixed in. They were not separable. But the peace I have never felt before. Peace was a new idea for me. Peace was, I am that. My restlessness was no longer there in that experience. Because my restlessness was the fact that I was never where I was.
Mm,
But now in this experience, I am that. This stuff is me
mm.
because my my self, the sense of self, my consciousness was out there. So I was both the observer and the observed. That's another complete change of perspective. As I was telling you before, I thought that I was separate from the world. Now, this experience is I am the world observing myself. Big change of perspective. I am a part whole of one. I have, because I have the same character of one. I have the same potentiality of one, but I'm also a part of one. Just like a cell in our body is a part whole of the body because it has the genome of the entire body. Every cell contains the genome of the whole organism, of the one organism. In this case, we are a part whole of the universe, which, we are a field. We are not the body. So clearly, the idea that I am, before, my consciousness, the sense of myself was only in my head. It was not even in my body, it was in my head. Now with this experience is everywhere, not only in my body, but also outside of my body. That's a change like this to this, complete reversal of perspective that I had before. And the other thing is that my body was vibrating, and it was hot. So every aspect of me was living this experience. This was a lived experience. It's a lived way to know. Is you know because you experience all those things I can say now, but they were implicit in that experience. But it took years to unroll in a way that experience, which probably lasted a minute, maybe two, but no more. This was just like an unbelievable flash. It changed my life because it told me that what I thought I was not what I was, because the sense of truth of that experience was so strong. I could not compare it to anything that had happened in my life before that was as true, as powerful. Consciousness is the one that allows you to know that. Is this an imagination? Is this fantasy? Or consciousness can actually tell you if that is true or not, or close to the truth than any other thing. all of us have one day or another had a dream that was so vivid that you thought you were the dream, right? You truly existed in that dream. I had many dreams before of that nature, but even more later after this experience. But where basically you wake up and for a second you thought you were actually, this reality it was a dream, not the other one. This one was even stronger than that, and that's why he had the power to transform my life. Otherwise, how could he have the power to transform my life? I would have doubted my own experience, right? I would have said, well, maybe I better go see a psychiatrist here and see what he tells me, right? So he tells me what I feel. Well, we should be able to know what we feel ourselves.
There's a few points here in your story that stand out for me. One is, we hear a lot of people who have a drastic spiritual awakening, which it sounds like this was for you, where they question it, right? They wonder, am I going crazy? Am I making it up? What did I feel or not? And the difference between an imagination and a fully embodied experience is the vibrating of the body, the fact that it was fully immersive, and that you are not just imagining something in a waking state or an imaginative state. You're not daydreaming. You're having a full visceral experience that is exceptionally powerful.
Everything was going with it. There was a unity in the experience, I am inside, outside, and body, mind, and spirit.
The other thing that's fascinating and describes a lot of what's common in a way when you have a spiritual experience is realizing that thoughts exist before we're able to translate them. That information and ideas exist in this collective field that we're going to get into, and we want the scientific explanation of how you think that exists, but that the universe, the world that we live in, is made up of all of this information, and simply our brains are the interpreters and the translators of that information into a language so that things can, for lack of a better word, exist all around us, and yet they just can appear. And we have to figure out, what does that mean? How do we communicate them? How do we translate that into something that's shareable?
Yeah, well, in the way I say it these days is that meaning comes first. In other words, meaning comes before symbols. The symbols are invented in order to carry meaning. But if there is no meaning, there shouldn't be any symbols because the meaning comes first, come before symbols. In science, symbols have no meaning. Information is only the probability that symbols appear or not. That's it. There's no meaning to the symbols. That's it. Now I can say it clearly. At that time, it was inherent in the experience. But to unpack that experience, it took me years, right? But also years to get to the source of understanding. Now my theory actually it can explain what happened, but before it was, this is the opposite of what scientism has been telling me. Science with the capital S, but scientism, the ideas that we have about the world.
What was it like for you after that minute, the next day, remembering that you had this experience? Were you able to go back to that state, or was it something like a reminder that, was it something in your memory that you were like, wait a second, that existed, so like I have to unpack it and understand it? How did it change your life in like the day, the week after?
Basically, it was very clear that there was a message from a deeper part of reality which I couldn't know, but that message had to be followed. It was very clear, and it was a personal message, almost like now I would say my high self opening up the kimono and saying, "Look, man, this is what's real." And then figure it out.
So you were set out on a journey in that moment afterwards.
Absolutely. I was set out on a journey. They started immediately, within days. I mean, after I came back and, obviously, I was running a company, so on. But I think it was probably 2 weeks before later on that I found a person to go and begin the process. And that was the, process that lasted about 20 years that allowed me to arrive at the conclusion that consciousness and free will must go hand in hand, and they must be fundamental. They cannot be explained in any other way. And I've got to that point. I said, now my next step is to join science and spirituality, figure out a way to combine, because it was clear that only quantum physics could explain, if any, what happened. But now, actually, I've arrived to the point where I said we have to start there. And the fact that we are conscious and have free will can explain why the world has to manifest itself as quantum physics. You see, it's a complete reversal again. For many years, I was trying to explain consciousness and free will. Quantum physics, as this quantum physics, was more fundamental than consciousness and free will. Now I say no. Consciousness and free will are the fundamental ontology. Quantum physics is the way, the manifestation of that ontology that then begets certain mathematical properties, which are really maps of a territory. But the territory is consciousness and free will. These fields that have this property, they communicate with each other, entities, but they're not entities in space and time. They're entities in a deeper reality that control bodies which are in what we collectively call space-time, which is a construction that we made because we have similar bodies, similar ways of thinking, similar culture, and so on. But the deeper reality is a reality that has entities that want to know themselves. And through those entities knowing themselves, one, the totality of what exists, knows itself.
Well, yeah, and in Irreducible, you kind of take us through all of these paths.
Yes, but the new book actually goes the next step, which is because that book still wanted to explain consciousness and free will with mathematics, with quantum physics. And then it was only writing my third book that I realized one day I said, "Oh, I'm stupid. Yeah, I had to turn it around. I cannot explain consciousness. We have to start there. That's ontology. Then the math which is quantum physics, is really math. The only ontology of quantum physics is the quantum fields are ontological. That's it. And you start there. With quantum physics, you start with the quantum fields and the ontology is there, but that ontology does not contain consciousness and free will. And so you only describe the outer aspect of reality.
This level of depth, though, I think is one that we want to spend a little bit of time in. So consciousness, you say, is the ability to experience qualia, right? To experience the qualities of the things that we kind of identify and experience, and to know the meaning of the experience.
That's exactly right. That's the deeper thing of qualia. Qualia are just like symbols are bringers of experience. Qualia are the bringers of meaning of the experience. And that's a deeper aspect.
So there's things that we experience, then there's the meaning that we draw from them. But what we're now talking about is, what does it mean to say that the universe was alive and conscious from its outset? Because this is something that you talk about, that consciousness is a quantum property of a field and not the property of the states of the field. Can you explain kind of how this works into our understanding of the difference between meaning and sort of a larger oneness of meaning?
First of all, there is one, right? One is the totality of what exists. And one, described by quantum physics, has two fundamental properties. Is dynamic, meaning is never the same, keeps on changing, never the same. But we all experience that. And second is holistic. That took a while, because holism comes from a property called entanglement that exists only in quantum physics. Particles, when particles interact, they get into common joint states. That information that is created in that interaction, independent of distance afterwards. And that is, nobody can explain how that can happen. What it means is that everything is interconnected. The universe is not made of separable parts. Not only that, but the particles, what we have imagined as little ball, when you measure them in one point, you think is a point particle. They are states of fields. They're not separable from the field. They're states of the field, like waves of a sea. The wave of the sea are states of the sea. But if we don't see the sea, we only see the wave, we think that the wave is separate from the sea. That's a little bit to understand what we have thought about an electron. An electron is a wave in the sea, which is the field of electrons. Only when it is an excited state of the field, because it can exist, that electron can exist as a non-excited state of the field, and it still exists, but it's inside the water. We don't know. We cannot tell anything about it.